You think you're independent, but you're already owned. Obedience masquerades as virtue. Loyalty becomes a leash, and your moral pride is the mechanism tightening around your throat. You were trained to see the world through a moral lens that was never designed to protect you. It was designed to make you predictable. Good intentions, fairness, decency. These concepts were not given to you as weapons, they were installed as restraints. While you evaluated behavior based on virtue, others evaluated it based on leverage. That difference is not philosophical, it is fatal. Power does not announce itself as power. It presents as reason, concern, structure, responsibility. Control survives by wearing the mask of order. The lens you're about to discard tells you that domination is loud, cruel, obvious. The tyrants shout and abusers strike. That belief alone is enough to keep you compliant for decades. Real control is quiet. It waits for your consent, then engineers it. Look closely at how you currently interpret pressure. When someone frames demands as expectations, you comply. When punishment is framed as consequences, you rationalize it. When surveillance is framed as care, you relax. Your lens translates coercion into cooperation. That translation is the trap. The first shift is this: stop asking whether something is fair or kind. Start asking whether it reduces your optionality. Anything that narrows your choices while increasing another person's certainty is not neutral, it is a move. Power is not emotional, it is mechanical. It measures inputs and outputs. It rewards obedience not because obedience is good, but because it is efficient. You were also taught that intentions matter. They don't. Only outcomes matter. Control profiles thrive because they operate in outcomes while you debate intentions. They let you win moral arguments while they quietly win positioning. By the time you feel exploited, the structure is already complete. Escaping then feels wrong because your lens tells you that disrupting the structure violates some invisible social contract. That contract was never mutual. Notice how often you self-police, how quickly you correct your tone, how reflexively you explain yourself. Those behaviors are not politeness, they are signals. They announce that you can be shaped. Predators don't need to threaten men who preemptively submit. They just need to apply light pressure and watch who folds. Breaking the lens also means abandoning the fantasy of safety through goodness. History does not reward the harmless. It tolerates them until they become useful, then discards them when they don't comply. Selection favors those who understand force, even if they don't always use it. You don't need to become cruel. You need to become legible to power. This chapter is not asking you to hate people or distrust everyone. That would be emotional and sloppy. It is asking you to adopt a colder instrument panel, one that tracks incentives, dependencies, and asymmetries. When someone gains from your confusion, that is not an accident. When rules only apply in one direction, that is not culture, it is hierarchy. From this point forward, you will assume that control exists before it is proven, not after. You will treat moral language as camouflage until verified by behavior. You will stop interpreting discomfort as a personal flaw and start reading it as environmental feedback. Discomfort often signals pressure points being tested. Your lens does one thing above all else: it returns agency. Not by making you aggressive, but by making you accurate. You can't fight what you refuse to see, and you can't see clearly while clinging to a lens that confuses submission with virtue. The old lens keeps you calm, the new lens keeps you alive. Control is not a personality trait, it is a system, a repeatable engine built from predictable human weaknesses. Once you see the components, you stop being impressed by the operator. What looked like charisma, authority, or care collapses into mechanics. The engine runs on 4 fuels: guilt, validation, fear, and dependency. These are not emotions in this context, they are levers. Each one shortens your decision cycle and hands timing to someone else. When all 4 are engaged, resistance feels irrational, even dangerous. Start with guilt. Guilt is the cheapest lever because it recruits you as the enforcer. Once installed, it requires no supervision. You anticipate expectations before they're stated. You apologize for boundaries. You explain decisions you were never obligated to justify. Guilt converts autonomy into something that feels borrowed, and borrowed things must be returned. Next is validation. This is where control becomes addictive. Validation is not praise, it is conditional approval. It arrives intermittently, just enough to keep you calibrated to someone else's reactions. You begin adjusting behavior not for results, but for recognition. This is how grown men end up performing for invisible judges. Validation trains you to seek permission emotionally, even when none is required. Fear is the accelerator, not overt fear, subtle fear. Fear of loss, exclusion, reputational damage, conflict. Fear doesn't need threats, it only needs uncertainty. When outcomes become unpredictable, you default to caution. You choose safety over leverage. The controller doesn't need to harm you, they only need to convince you that harm is possible if you misstep. Dependency is the final lock. Once your access to resources, identity, or stability routes through a single channel, control becomes self-sustaining. You start optimizing for continuity instead of advantage. You tolerate inefficiencies. You accept disrespect. Not because you're weak, but because the system has narrowed your exits. Here's the critical inversion. None of this requires malice. Control engines often operate through nice people. Managers, partners, institutions, friends. Intentions are irrelevant because systems outlive moods. A well-built control engine keeps running even when the operator believes they're being fair. Notice the sequence. Guilt softens you. Validation hooks you. Fear rushes you. Dependency cages you. By the time you name what's happening, your nervous system is already negotiating on behalf of the structure. You don't ask, is this good for me? You ask, how do I avoid disruption? Language is the lubricant. We're a team. This is for your own good. After everything we've done. These phrases are not communication. They are triggers. Each one activates a different lever. Teams imply obligation. Care implies debt. History implies permanence. You're not responding to logic. You're responding to conditioning. The most dangerous part is that the engine rewards compliance with relief. Pressure eases when you submit. That relief feels like peace. You mistake the absence of punishment for safety. In reality, you've just confirmed that pressure works on you. The system logs that data and escalates later. Understand this clearly. Resistance is not what breaks control. Opacity does. The engine needs predictability. It needs to know which lever to pull. When your reactions flatten, when your validation seeking stops, when guilt no longer produces speed, the system destabilizes. Controllers lose interest in targets that don't yield clean responses. This chapter isn't about paranoia, it's about fluency. Once you understand the engine, you stop personalizing pressure. You stop arguing with tactics. You start mapping systems. And systems can be exited, rerouted, or starved. Control survives in the dark. Mechanisms die under inspection.
Control does not appear randomly. It clusters into recognizable forms. Once you can name them, their power collapses, not because they disappear, but because surprise is their strongest weapon. These profiles survive by blending into environments that reward obedience and punish friction. They are not villains, they are selections. Profile 1. The moral architect. This controller builds authority through virtue. They speak in values, principles, and higher purpose. Every demand is framed as the right thing to do. Disagreement is not treated as resistance, but as a character flaw. You're not wrong, you're selfish, immature, ungrateful. The trap is moral elevation. Once they occupy the high ground, every interaction tilts downhill in their favor. The moral architect doesn't threaten, they disappoint. And disappointment is devastating to men conditioned to equate worth with approval. You begin pre-complying to avoid being seen as that guy. Over time, your decisions are no longer strategic, they're reputational. You protect an image they defined. That image becomes your leash. Profile 2. The benevolent gatekeeper. This controller controls access, information, opportunities, resources, social circles. They present themselves as generous and supportive, but always position themselves as the bridge. Nothing flows to you directly, everything passes through them. They never say no outright. They delay, reframe, or forget. You stay polite because you need what they can unlock. The gatekeeper's power is asymmetry. They know you're waiting. You don't know where you stand. This uncertainty keeps you compliant. You hedge, you soften, you avoid conflict. Eventually, you start negotiating against yourself, offering more just to keep access open. They don't have to ask, the structure asks for them. Profile 3. The volatile enforcer. This one trains through instability, mood swings, sudden withdrawal, explosive reactions followed by silence. The goal is not violence, it's calibration. You learn the emotional terrain and adjust behavior to avoid punishment. Peace becomes conditional. You don't relax, you monitor. The enforcer doesn't need to be present to control you. The anticipation does the work. Your nervous system becomes the guard. You choose the path of least resistance, not because it's right, but because it's quiet. Over time, you confuse the absence of chaos with harmony. It isn't. It's containment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. These profiles often overlap. The most effective controllers mix virtue with access, kindness with volatility. This keeps you off balance. You can't name the threat, so you assume the fault is yours. That assumption is the final layer of control. Notice what all three share. They extract compliance without force. They rely on your internal regulation, your desire to be good, included, and safe. These are not weaknesses in isolation. They become weaknesses when weaponized. This chapter isn't about labeling people in your life. That would be reactive. It's about recognizing patterns of leverage. The moment you stop responding to the profile and start responding to the mechanism, the dynamic shifts. Controllers don't fight back immediately. They test, they escalate, they probe for the old reactions. If nothing appears, no guilt, no over-explaining, no urgency, the system stalls. Profiles are not identities, they are strategies, and strategies fail when their assumptions stop holding. Control profiles don't win because they are smarter. They win because they are aligned with how humans actually behave under pressure, not how they wished they behaved. History doesn't reward virtue in isolation. It rewards those who understand leverage, timing, and the cost of resistance. Every era pretends otherwise. Every era is lying to itself. Look back far enough and the pattern stabilizes. Tribes didn't follow the kindest hunter. They followed the one who could organize violence and distribute resources. Kingdoms weren't built by moral philosophers. They were stabilized by men who understood fear, reward, and loyalty as currencies. Civilization didn't eliminate domination. It refined it. Control moved from clubs to contracts, from chains to norms. Human nature hasn't evolved past this. It has only learned to disguise it. Modern control operates through narratives instead of force, but the selection pressure is the same. Those who can shape behavior without resistance rise. Those who insist on fairness without power are tolerated until scarcity arrives. Scarcity always arrives. This is why control profiles feel inevitable. They exploit defaults. Most people avoid conflict. Most people want approval. Most people fear exclusion more than exploitation. These are not moral failures, they are evolutionary shortcuts. In stable environments, they work. In contested environments, they get harvested. The deeper threat is that systems now amplify these profiles. Bureaucracies reward predictability. Social structures reward compliance. Algorithms reward emotional engagement. The moral architect thrives where values are broadcast but rarely enforced equally. The gatekeeper thrives where access is centralized. The enforcer thrives where accountability is diffuse. None of this is accidental. It is adaptive. You may ask why resistance feels so costly. Because it is. Challenging control breaks the social illusion. It forces others to choose sides. Most will choose stability over truth, not because they hate you, but because destabilization threatens their own arrangements. This is how control profiles recruit allies without trying. The environment does the work. History is filled with men who were right and still destroyed. Being correct offers no protection if you are isolated. Control profiles understand this instinctively. They never move alone. They entrench before they act. By the time you object, the outcome is already framed as necessary. There's also a darker layer. People often prefer to be controlled. Responsibility is heavy. Sovereignty is lonely. Many men trade autonomy for structure without realizing it. Control profiles simply formalize that trade. They offer certainty in exchange for compliance, and certainty is seductive when the world feels unstable. This is why exposing control rarely frees people. It embarrasses them. It threatens the narrative they rely on to justify their choices. So they defend the system instead. You become the problem, the disruptor, the threat. This reversal is not personal. It is systemic self-defense. Understand this, and you stop expecting justice to intervene. Justice is not a force of nature. It is a negotiated outcome. Control profiles win because they negotiate from position, while others appeal to principle. Principle without leverage is decoration. This chapter exists to remove your surprise. Nothing happening to you is new. Nothing is unique. You are inside an old game with modern aesthetics. Once you accept that, you stop asking why they win. You start asking how to stop being selected.
Most men hear resistance and imagine defiance, arguments, ultimatums, emotional stands. That instinct is exactly what control profiles expect and prepare for. Strategic non-compliance is colder, quieter. It is not refusal, it is withdrawal of yield. Control systems don't require your loyalty, they require your responsiveness, your speed, your emotional output, your predictability. Strategic non-compliance begins when you stop feeding the system the data it needs to optimize against you. The first shift is tempo control. Controllers rush you because urgency collapses analysis. Deadlines, pressure, now or never frames, these force instinctive compliance. You slow everything down. You delay responses. You decouple decisions from emotion. Time is leverage. Whoever controls tempo controls outcome. Next is explanation starvation. Over-explaining is submission in disguise. Every justification reveals values, fears, priorities, targets. You replace explanations with conclusions, short answers, neutral tone,
No narrative, no defense. Controllers argue against stories. They struggle against silence. Then comes validation refusal. This is the most destabilizing move. Control profiles rely on emotional feedback loops, approval, disappointment, tension, relief. You flatten the signal. Praise doesn't excite you. Criticism doesn't agitate you. You become unreadable. Systems cannot calibrate against static. Strategic non-compliance also requires exit optionality. Dependency is what makes compliance feel rational. You quietly build parallel paths, skills, alliances, resources that reduce the cost of walking away. You don't announce this, you don't threaten, you prepare. Power respects preparation more than protest. Notice what you are not doing. You are not confronting. You are not exposing. You are not trying to win morally. Those moves trigger escalation. Strategic non-compliance starves the engine instead of fighting it. Controllers don't rage first. They probe. They apply pressure in familiar ways and wait for the old response. When it doesn't come, they escalate briefly. This is the test. Volatility spikes, guilt intensifies, access tightens. This is where most men fold, mistaking escalation for proof of necessity. It isn't. It's proof of dependence. If you hold position, calm, slow, opaque, the system recalculates. Control profiles prefer efficiency. Targets that require constant force are expensive. Eventually, pressure shifts elsewhere, not because you defeated them, but because you stopped being profitable. There is risk here. Non-compliance costs comfort. It may cost relationships built on asymmetry. It may cost status inside structures that reward obedience. That loss is the price of sovereignty. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling fantasy. Strategic non-compliance is not rebellion. Rebels are predictable. It is non-alignment. You are no longer against the system. You are no longer for it. You are outside its logic. That is what control cannot tolerate, but also cannot easily punish. By the end of this chapter, the goal is simple. You are harder to use, harder to rush, harder to guilt, harder to cage. Not invincible, just inefficient. And inefficiency is how control begins to fail. Control does not attach to strength, it attaches to identity, specifically the identity that needs to be seen as good, reasonable, loyal, or indispensable. That version of you was not accidental, it was shaped by reward and punishment until it became self-sustaining. This chapter ends it. The compliant identity survives by negotiation. It asks, how do I stay acceptable? That question alone gives power away. Acceptability is a currency issued by others. The moment you price yourself in it, you surrender sovereignty. Controllers don't need to dominate you. You dominate yourself to maintain the role. Identity death begins with a severance. You stop tying self-worth to reaction. Praise no longer confirms you. Disapproval no longer destabilizes you. This is not confidence. Confidence still seeks outcome validation. This is indifference to adjudication. You are no longer auditioning. Next comes the abandonment of moral performance. You were trained to broadcast virtue, clarity, honesty, loyalty as proof of value. Those signals attract extraction. You keep your ethics private and your behavior precise. You do not explain motives. You do not volunteer alignment. You act cleanly and let ambiguity do the rest. Ambiguity is armor. The old identity also craves closure. It wants resolution, harmony, being on the same page. Controllers exploit this by dragging conflicts into endless clarification loops. The new identity tolerates unfinished business. It leaves conversations unresolved. It exits without agreement. It understands that clarity benefits the party with leverage. You will feel this as loss. The death of the old identity removes familiar comforts, being liked, being trusted, being relied upon. Those comforts were payments for access. When they stop, so does the illusion of belonging. This is the moment most men retreat. They call it growth. It's regression. Replacement requires construction, not affirmation. The sovereign identity is built on 3 pillars. Boundaries without announcement. You do not declare lines, you enforce them by behavior. You leave, you disengage, you reduce access, quietly. Costs without warnings. Consequences occur without warnings. Warnings invite negotiation. Costs end it. Presence without attachment. You are fully present but never dependent. You can enjoy, contribute, and lead without needing permanence. This unnerves control profiles because it offers no handle. There is nothing to guilt, nothing to dangle, nothing to scare. Attempts to provoke emotion fail. Attempts to moralize fall flat. Attempts to restrict access expose their own intent. The mask slips. Make no mistake, this is not isolation. It is selective engagement. You still cooperate, you still build, you still ally, but only where leverage is mutual and exit remains intact. You are no longer impressed by structure alone. You evaluate alignment, incentives, and reversibility. The final cut is internal. You stop narrating yourself as victim or hero. Both roles center the controller. You adopt a colder frame. What does this interaction cost me, and what does it return? If the equation degrades, you adjust or withdraw. No drama, no announcement. Identity death is permanent. You can't unsee leverage once you've lived without it pressed against your throat. You won't be celebrated for this shift. You may be criticized. That is confirmation, not failure. The old identity wanted safety through acceptance. The new identity accepts risk to remain sovereign. If you think this ends with awareness, you are already falling back into the old identity. Awareness is not an achievement, it is a maintenance cost. Selection does not pause because you've figured it out. It never has, it never will. Every environment you enter is a sorting mechanism. Workplaces, relationships, social circles, institutions. They are not neutral spaces. They are filters designed to extract compliance, competence, or obedience. The only variable is what they reward. The moment you relax your lens, the system tests you again. Pressure returns quietly, disguised as opportunity. Here is the final inversion you must accept. Power is not taken from you once. It is siphoned continuously in small, socially acceptable transactions. You agree to one exception, you tolerate one asymmetry, you justify one delay in exit. None of these feel dangerous alone. Together, they rebuild the cage. Control profiles do not need to hunt you if you become visible again. Visibility is vulnerability. The more legible your values, fears, and attachments, the easier you are to position. This is why the sovereign remains selective with disclosure. Silence is not secrecy, it is risk management. You will notice something unsettling after this shift. Fewer people will feel close. That is not loss, that is filtration. Many connections survive on access to your emotional labor, reliability, and moral predictability. When those are no longer free, the relationship collapses. That collapse reveals its true nature retroactively. Do not confuse loneliness with failure. Loneliness is a transition state. Control thrives in crowded dependency. Sovereignty often looks empty at first because it has no audience. Only later does it attract peers instead of dependents. This is the final warning. You will be tested when you are tired, distracted, or successful. Fatigue lowers vigilance. Success attracts extraction. That is when old patterns attempt re-entry. You will feel the temptation to just this once comply, explain, soften, or defer. That is how selection resets. There is no final boss. There is no permanent escape. There is only sustained positioning. You don't defeat control. You stay expensive to impose it on. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The world does not care who you are. It cares how much you yield. Yield less or be selected again.